My wife said her work trips paid our bills until I opened the bank app. I trusted my wife when she said her frequent work trips were keeping us afloat. One night, curiosity made me open our shared banking app, and I realized I was paying for her secret life with another man. I stayed quiet, planned carefully, and exposed everything at the exact moment she tried to leave me broke. When I opened the bank app that night, I realized our marriage had already ended. I just hadn't been told yet. The house was quiet in that fragile late-hour way, when even the refrigerator seems to hum more softly. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the wood cool against my forearms, my phone glowing pale blue in my hands. I'd only meant to check if my paycheck had cleared. That was all, a small, ordinary habit at the end of a long day. But as the loading circle spun, something in my chest tightened, like my body knew before my mind did. I stared at the numbers longer than I should have. They didn't make sense, not with what I earned, not with what she told me she earned. That night, my wife was 3 states away, or so she said. Before everything broke, our life looked normal from the outside, maybe even stable. We lived in a modest 2-story house with beige siding that always needed repainting, the kind of place where neighbors waved but didn't ask questions. Every morning, I woke up at 6, brewed coffee strong enough to sting my nose, and packed my lunch while the radio murmured news I barely listened to. She usually came downstairs in a silk robe, hair still damp, kissing my cheek absently as she scrolled through emails. Her name was Claire. We'd been married for 11 years. No kids, not for lack of trying, but because life has its own quiet decisions. Over time, we learned how to fill the space with routines instead. Sunday grocery trips, Thursday takeout nights, the small ritual of watching the same crime shows in bed, her feet always cold against my calf. Claire worked in regional operations for a logistics company. That's how she explained it to friends. It sounded important enough that no one asked follow-up questions. About 2 years ago, the trips started. Once a month at first, then twice, then sometimes every other week. She said the company was restructuring. Promotions, pressure, opportunity. These trips, she told me once, folding clothes into a carry-on, they're what's keeping us afloat. I believed her. I wanted to. I worked as a project manager for a small construction firm, steady income, nothing flashy. When Claire said her bonuses covered the gaps, medical bills, the roof repair, the credit card debt that never quite disappeared, I nodded and kissed her forehead. I was proud of her, or maybe relieved. I let myself sink into that comfort. Still, there were moments, tiny, almost invisible ones, like how she started keeping her phone face down on the counter, or how she'd step into the garage to take calls, her voice dropping into a careful whisper. Once, while folding laundry, I noticed new lingerie, black, delicate, nothing like the cotton sets she wore around me. When I asked, she laughed lightly. "Conference confidence," she said. "You should see what the other women wear." I told myself not to be that husband, the suspicious one, the one who sees ghosts in ordinary shadows. But absence has a way of changing the air in a house. When Claire was gone, the rooms felt larger, emptier. I ate dinner standing up, slept diagonally across the bed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake to the sound of a car passing outside and feel a flicker of relief until I remembered she wouldn't be back until Sunday. She always returned with stories. Overpriced hotel breakfasts, colleagues who drank too much, a boss who never listened. She brought souvenirs I didn't need, mugs, keychains, once a scarf that smelled faintly of a man's cologne she claimed came from a duty-free shop. I never checked the receipts. That night, the night of the bank app, she'd texted earlier, "Landed safe, long day tomorrow, miss you." There was a heart emoji. I stared at it longer than I should have. The app finally loaded. Our shared account showed transfers I didn't recognize. Regular ones, large ones, payments labeled as consulting and travel reimbursement, but the destinations didn't line up with her stories. Hotels I'd never heard her mention, a car lease under a name that wasn't hers, but wasn't mine either. My mouth went dry. I refreshed the screen like it would apologize. I didn't confront her, not then. I sat at that table until the coffee went cold, listening to the clock tick down the seconds of a life I thought I understood. Somewhere between midnight and morning, something inside me shifted, not into anger, not yet, but into a quiet, steady awareness. If Claire's work trips paid our bills, then why did it look like I was paying for someone else's life? I locked my phone, turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs alone. In bed, I stared at the ceiling, counting her absences like cracks in plaster. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever the truth was, it had been living with me for a long time. and I was finally ready to see it.
The next morning, I woke with the strange calm that comes right before a storm you know you can't outrun. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin, uneven lines, landing on the empty pillow beside me. It still smelled like Claire's shampoo, lavender, and something floral I'd never been able to name. For a moment, habit tried to take over. I reached for my phone to text her good luck today. My thumb hovered, then pulled back. I set the phone down like it had burned me. At work, I barely heard my coworkers. Emails blurred together. Numbers refused to settle in my head. Every few minutes, I felt the urge to open the bank app again, as if the figures might rearrange themselves into something gentler. They didn't. So instead of confronting her, I did something quieter. I watched. That night, I cooked dinner just for myself. Pasta, overcooked, sauce from a jar. I ate standing at the counter again, listening to the faint echo of the house. Afterward, I sat down with my laptop and logged into our bank account from the desktop, where the screen was bigger and the details harder to ignore. The pattern was clear now. Every time Claire left for a work trip, there were spikes in spending. Upscale hotels, restaurants I knew by reputation alone, and always, without fail, a transfer 2 or 3 days before she returned. Money moving out, smooth and quiet, like it had done this before, like it expected not to be noticed. One charge stopped me cold. A boutique jewelry store in a city she'd claimed to hate. The amount was more than I spent on my car in 6 months. My hands shook as I scrolled. There was a second account I didn't recognize, linked but not shared. I'd never seen it because I'd never had reason to look. It took some digging, but eventually I found a name tied to it. Evan Brooks. I said it out loud, just to hear it. The name sounded ordinary, harmless. For a few days, I lived in a careful fog. Claire came home smiling, dropping her suitcase by the door, kissing me like nothing had changed. I kissed her back. Her cheek was warm. Her eyes didn't waver. "How was the conference?" I asked, my voice steady enough to surprise me. "Exhausting," she sighed, "but worth it. I'll explain later." Later never came. Instead, I started paying attention to the small things I'd once ignored. The way she showered immediately after trips, how she'd tilt her phone away from me when a message came in, how she'd hum softly while cooking, like someone carrying a secret too sweet to contain. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't touch it, I just watched it light up the dark room. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Evan. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight, and waited for the water to turn off. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, I forced a smile. "Who's Evan?" I asked, casually, like I was asking about a coworker she'd mentioned before. She didn't miss a beat. "Client. He's on the West Coast. Annoying, but important." Her answer came too fast. I nodded, pretending to accept it, while something inside me went very still. That night, she fell asleep quickly, her breathing deep and even. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar rhythm of her presence and feeling like a stranger had crawled into my bed. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I started preparing. I copied bank statements, took screenshots, cross-referenced dates. When Claire left for another trip, I took a day off work and drove past the address listed under Evan's car lease. It was a townhouse in a gated community. Clean, expensive, the kind of place meant for someone building a life. I sat in my car across the street for nearly an hour, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching nothing happen. Then Claire's car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, laughing, her real laugh, the one I hadn't heard in months. A man followed her, tall, confident. He wrapped an arm around her waist like it belonged there. I didn't scream. I didn't honk. I didn't get out of the car. I watched. When they disappeared inside, I felt something finally crack. Not loudly, not at once, but like ice giving way under slow pressure. My marriage hadn't just been neglected, it had been funded, carefully, methodically, with my trust and my paycheck. On the drive home, the world looked slightly different, sharper, quieter. I realized Claire hadn't just been lying about where she went, she'd been planning, building something else while letting me believe we were surviving together. And the worst part? It was with my money. That night, as I lay alone again, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront her in anger. I wouldn't beg for explanations. If she was preparing to leave, then I would be ready. Calmer, steadier, and one step ahead. Because when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't be on her terms. It would be on mine. The hardest part wasn't pretending nothing was wrong. It was realizing how good I'd become at it.
Claire left again the following week. Another urgent trip. Another suitcase rolling across the hardwood floor at dawn. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching her move through the house like a guest who already knew she wouldn't be staying long. "Don't wait up," she said, smiling. "I'll call tonight." I nodded. "Travel safe." The door closed behind her with a soft, final click that lingered in the air. That morning, I didn't go to work. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where all of this had begun, and spread my laptop, a notebook, and printed statements in front of me like evidence at a quiet trial. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Life went on, unaware that mine was being dismantled line by line. I wasn't planning revenge. Not the kind people imagine, anyway. I wasn't interested in humiliation or shouting matches or dramatic scenes. I wanted something simpler. I wanted to make sure I wasn't left with nothing. I started with a lawyer, a quiet man recommended by a coworker who'd gone through a messy divorce years ago. His office smelled faintly of old books and burnt coffee. I laid everything out slowly. Our finances, the trips, the second account, the townhouse. He listened without interrupting, hands folded on the desk. "You did the right thing by not confronting her yet," he said finally. "Right now, you have leverage, evidence, timing." That word, timing, stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I became careful in ways I'd never needed to be before. I moved my paycheck into a new personal account, quietly, legally. I froze joint credit lines, not all at once, just enough to protect myself without raising alarms. I documented everything, screenshots, dates, locations, even small things like how often she texted while away, how vague her answers had become. Claire noticed changes, but she misread them. "You've been distant," she said one evening after returning from another trip. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the space between us wide and deliberate. "Work's been heavy. Deadlines." She nodded, accepting it too easily. That was when I understood something painful. She wasn't worried about losing me. She was worried about losing convenience. The confirmation came sooner than I expected. One Friday night, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her posture was careful, composed, like she'd rehearsed this. "I've been thinking about us." I waited. "I think we've grown apart, and I don't want us to resent each other. Maybe some time apart would be healthy." There it was. No tears, no shock, just a gentle push toward an exit she'd already prepared. "I agree," I said. She blinked, surprised. "You do?" "Yes." Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "I think it would be best if I stayed with a friend for a while, just until we figure things out." I nodded again. "Of course." That night, while she slept, I watched the slow rise and fall of her back and felt something close to pity. She had no idea how much I knew, or how close she was to walking into her own trap. The following Monday, she called me from the airport. "I'll be gone longer this time. New project." "Take care," I replied. That afternoon, I met Evan Brooks. Not face-to-face, not yet. I sent a single, carefully worded email to the address linked to the second account. No accusations, no threats, just a question. "Did you know the life you're building is funded by a marriage you're helping to destroy?" He replied 2 hours later. "I think you have the wrong idea." I sent him the statements. There was no response after that. The final step was the hardest, not legally, but emotionally. I scheduled a meeting with Claire's parents. We'd always been cordial. Holiday cards, polite conversations. They loved her fiercely, the way parents do. I didn't want revenge on them. I wanted the truth to exist outside of my head. When I laid everything out, her mother cried quietly. Her father stared at the table, jaw tight. "She told us you were struggling financially, that she was supporting you." That hurt more than I expected. "I never asked her to," I said gently. "I just trusted her." By the time Claire landed from her trip, the ground beneath her life had already shifted. She walked into the house that evening, suitcase in hand, and froze when she saw me sitting at the table with her parents beside me, papers spread neatly in front of us. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharp with panic. I stood slowly, my heart steady, my voice calm. "This," I said, "is the truth." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in months, she had no story ready. And for the first time since opening that bank app, I felt something like control return to my body. The reckoning had arrived. Claire didn't sit down. She stood there with her suitcase still upright beside her, fingers clenched around the handle like it was the only solid thing left in the room. Her eyes moved from her parents to the papers on the table, then back to me. I watched the color drain from her face in real time. "What is this?" she asked again, but softer now, uncertain. Her mother spoke before I could. "We'd like you to explain," she said, her voice trembling despite the effort to steady it. "All of it." Claire laughed once, a short, brittle sound that didn't belong to her. "Explain what? You're ambushing me now?" I slid one of the statements toward her. Not shoved, not slammed, just enough that it crossed into her space. The accounts, the transfers, Evan. At his name, something flickered in her eyes. Fear, anger, calculation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her father leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "Is this true?" Silence settled over us, thick and heavy. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder than it ever had. Finally, Claire set the suitcase down slowly and pulled out a chair. She sat, crossing her arms like armor. "It's not what it looks like," she said. No one interrupted her. That seemed to unnerve her more than shouting would have. "I was under a lot of pressure. Work, expectations. Our marriage wasn't working. I felt invisible." I watched her hands as she spoke. They were steady, practiced. "So you lied?" her mother asked. "For how long?" Claire's gaze flicked to me. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." Her father stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "You used joint money," he said, voice rising. "Money your husband earned, for another man." "That's not fair," Claire snapped. "I contributed." "Not like this," her mother said quietly. I realized then that this moment wasn't about winning. It was about clarity, the truth, laid bare, stripped of excuses. "I never stopped you from leaving," I said. My voice surprised even me with its calm. "But you chose to stay, to take, to plan a future that didn't include me, while making sure I paid for it." Claire finally looked at me fully, really looked. "I was going to tell you," she said. I shook my head. "No, you were going to leave me broke." That was when she broke. Her shoulders sagged, her eyes filled, not with remorse, but with the panic of someone who'd lost control of the narrative. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Evan needed help. He was starting over. I wanted something that felt mine." Her parents exchanged a look that carried decades of shared disappointment. "This ends now," her father said. "You will come clean to everyone who needs to know, and you will fix what you can." The fallout came quietly, then all at once. Claire moved out that weekend, not to Evan's townhouse, he'd changed the locks, but to her parents' guest room. Word traveled faster than I expected. Friends reached out cautiously. Some avoided me altogether. Others apologized for not seeing it sooner. At her workplace, an internal review began. Expense reports didn't add up. Titles she'd inflated were questioned. The bonuses she'd bragged about turned out to be reimbursements she'd misused. Evan disappeared from the picture entirely. One short message arrived in my inbox weeks later. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. The legal process unfolded without drama. Assets were divided fairly. The evidence spoke for itself. I kept the house. She kept what she could justify. There were no shouting matches in court, just paperwork and quiet consequences. The strangest part was the silence afterward. No more late-night arrivals, no more suitcases by the door. The house felt different, not empty exactly, but honest. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. One evening, I stood in the kitchen washing a single plate and noticed something simple. I could breathe. Claire tried to call once, left a voicemail full of apologies and explanations that came too late. I deleted it without listening all the way through, not out of anger, but because I didn't need it. The public reckoning hadn't destroyed her, it had revealed her, and in doing so, it had given me something I hadn't realized I'd lost, myself. I slept better, ate better, started running in the mornings, the cold air sharp in my lungs. Friends came back around, slowly, bringing coffee and conversation instead of pity. One night, sitting alone on the porch, I understood the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is loud. Justice is quiet and lasting. And as the house settled around me, I knew the hardest part was finally behind me. All that was left was learning how to live again.
The first morning I woke up without resentment felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room after the furniture has been moved. Sunlight came through the kitchen window at a softer angle than I remembered. I stood there, barefoot, coffee mug warming my hands, listening to the quiet hum of a life that was finally my own. No one was rushing out the door, no suitcase waited by the stairs, no half-truths lingered in the air. For a long time, I thought healing would arrive dramatically, that one day I'd wake up and feel whole again, but it didn't come that way. It arrived in pieces, small, ordinary pieces. I replaced the cracked kitchen clock, the one that had ticked through so many sleepless nights. I painted the spare bedroom a lighter color. I donated clothes that still smelled like her perfume. Each act felt insignificant on its own, but together they formed something steady, grounded. People asked how I was doing, and for the first time, my answer wasn't automatic. "I'm okay," I said, and meant it. Claire and I spoke only once more, briefly, practically, through our lawyers. By then, the emotional distance was complete. She sounded tired, smaller somehow. Not the woman I'd married, and not the person she'd tried to become. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. What I felt instead was clarity. She made choices, I lived with the consequences, but I also survived them. That mattered more than blame. I started taking evening walks through the neighborhood, same sidewalks I'd walked before, but now I noticed things I hadn't. The way porch lights flickered on at dusk, the sound of laughter drifting from open windows, life continuing, messy, imperfect, and strangely reassuring. One night, I sat on the back steps and thought about trust, how fragile it is, how easily we hand it over, believing love will keep it safe. I wondered if I'd been foolish, but I realized something important. Trusting her hadn't been my failure. Betraying that trust had been hers, and that distinction gave me peace. Months passed, the story became something people stopped asking about. At work, I took on a new project that demanded focus and patience. I felt useful again, capable, not because someone needed me, but because I chose to show up. Sometimes late at night, memories surfaced, not the betrayal, but the good years, the laughter, the shared routines. I let them pass without fighting them. They were real, even if the ending wasn't what I'd imagined. One evening, I received a message from a stranger. "I heard your story from a mutual friend," it read. "Thank you for handling it with dignity. It helped me leave something I'd been afraid to face." I stared at the screen for a long time. That was when I understood the quiet power of standing up for yourself without becoming someone you don't recognize. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anything to Claire or Evan or to anyone watching from the sidelines. I rebuilt it because I deserved a life that wasn't funded by lies. Now, when I check my bank app, it's just numbers again, honest ones, boring even, and that's exactly how I like it. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this: pay attention to the quiet moments, the ones where something doesn't quite sit right. Curiosity isn't betrayal, it's awareness, and awareness can save you years of silence. I don't know where Claire ended up. I hope she found whatever she was searching for, truly. But I also hope she learned that taking someone's trust is a debt that always comes due. As for me, I'm learning to live slower, to listen more, to build a future that doesn't require pretending. And sometimes, in the stillness of the evening, I ask myself a question I never thought I'd need to answer. If you discovered the truth the way I did, would you have stayed quiet enough to protect yourself? If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it or supporting the channel so others know they're not alone. And if you've ever trusted someone completely, thank you for listening.